Hello, everyone. My name is Odin Mühlenbein. I'm a partner at Ashoka Germany, and I will be your facilitator for this session. I don't know about you, but I've seen this video now like a dozen times, and it never gets old. So good job there. As you have heard, the theme of this conference is rediscovering certainty. And this might sound as if we knew how to solve the world's most pressing problems, but I'm afraid that we actually do not. What we do know, though, is that social entrepreneurs can play an important role in changing society for the better. Social entrepreneurs are resilient. Even without an ecosystem to support them, many are able to achieve impressive changes in society. We believe that they could achieve even more with the right kind of support. And one of the actors that can provide that support is governments. That is why Ashoka has partnered with a number of key ecosystem players to look at how governments could better include and support systems changing social entrepreneurs. These partners include Catalyst 2030, Echoing Green, the Schwab Foundation, and the Skoll Foundation. McKinsey joined as our facilitation partner, and government representatives, including from the UN and the European Commission, were on our advisory board. Based on that report, I am very pleased to be spending the next 55 minutes with you all to explore how governments can better include and support social entrepreneurs. We are joined by 4 outstanding speakers today. We have Katharina Wagner from McKinsey, a co-author of the report and the person who held this coalition together for the last 7 weeks. We have Mariam Uwais, a special advisor to the Vice President on Social Investments in Nigeria. We have Sarah Prince Robin, a social entrepreneur at the Ministry for an Ecological Transition in France. And we have Blair Glencourse, the founder and executive director at Accountability Lab, a US-based social venture that has a lot of experience in working with governments. You too can contribute as well. Feel free to use the chat that you see on the Swapcard platform on the right-hand side. Florian Rutsch will be monitoring the chat. Florian is also one of the co-authors of the report, and he will be there to answer any questions that you might have. Actually, let us start with that chat. When you hear government support for systemic social entrepreneurs, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Just write it in the chat. And then I ask Florian to give us some of the answers that we hear there. All right, so we have some good ones already. We hear complementarity, win-win, legislation changes. So this is probably from people who have had good experiences. We also hear things like useless grants, logo printing, and miracle, which already goes to show that that not everything is working as it should when it comes to government supporting social entrepreneurs. So let's see where we can go from here. For the flow of the session is going to be as follows. I will provide just a little bit of context about the study and how we looked at social entrepreneurs. Then I will hand it over to Katharina to provide a summary of the report that we are going to release very soon. Then we'll hear from our government representatives how they feel about this topic, what their personal motivation is, and where they see the value. And then we'll answer whatever questions you might have. So feel free to already post them in the chat so we have some ready at the last 15 minutes of the session. So in terms of context, in the beginning, I mentioned that we want governments to better support social entrepreneurs, and that is true, but we are not talking about any social entrepreneur. We want to support systems changing social entrepreneurs. So the systems part is quite important to us. It means that we want to support the transition guides for society, the people who don't just look at the symptoms of a social problem, but its root causes. And this is different from the activists or academics that you might associate more with the systems approach, in that they actually build things that you can see in the world and that can show us the way towards a different system. We are looking not at any kind of entrepreneur, we are looking at social entrepreneurs. So these are people that put society's benefit first. And we are looking at entrepreneurs. So this is different from volunteer organizations or yeah, and but entrepreneurs in a different way. They don't necessarily have to have for-profit ventures, right? So they can be they can use any legal entity that they want, but they have to pursue their work in an entrepreneurial spirit. To change things in society. I'm just mentioning this because those were some of the misunderstandings that we encountered when we did the interviews for our report. So with this clarification in place, let me hand it over to Katharina to summarize the findings of our report. How can governments better support systems changing social entrepreneurs?
Thank you, Odin. Let me just share my screen. Here we go. So Odin has already mentioned the amount of work that has gone into this report. Let me just outline that we've talked to more than 50 experts, both on the government side, but also on the social sector side, especially the systemic social entrepreneurs Odin just mentioned. We've looked at a ton of case examples. 35 of them are actually included in the report, but we've seen many, many more. And there's just a whole lot out there that we just didn't have the room to include. And we've had a focus group, Odin's already mentioned that, of experts that have accompanied our journey on this report. So with these couple of figures in mind, let's have a look at what we found. So from all of the conversations and the reading that we've done, a couple of patterns emerged on how governments can take action to better collaborate with these systemic social entrepreneurs. We've divided the different areas that we've identified into something that we call input factors, because they can be thought of as sort of the inputs into the production function for social innovation. So the different kinds of things that you need to put in to help a social entrepreneur develop something new, but also enablers. And these are the kinds of things that help a social innovation grow and have the most impact possible. So let me start on the left-hand side with open information. So this is the first theme we've identified. And here, the main message is that the more information we have publicly accessible to everyone, the better. On the one hand, social entrepreneurs can use that information to better target their interventions and their approaches, because they can learn about how an issue they're interested in and they're working on may differ in different groups with data that the government has collected. On the other side, social entrepreneurs can also be wonderful allies for governments in collecting more data, because a lot of times certain data points are rather difficult for governments to collect. One example is around corruption, and I think we have a wonderful case study there in the report of a government that's used crowdsourced citizen-generated data to learn about which infrastructure projects actually get built as they were promised to be built. So that's a fantastic opportunity where social entrepreneurs can step in and facilitate that community generation of data to help governments make more informed decisions. The second aspect that we are talking about in the report is on capabilities. Now here we have two partners that we think should be working together that are at times very different. On the one hand side, we have governments who tend to focus very much on technical expertise, certificates, formal education. We're very good on technical things, but they may not be as strong on elements like systemic thinking, collaboration, and co-creation approaches. On the other side, we have the systemic social entrepreneurs who are very strong on that, but may not be as used to working with bureaucracies and large administrations. So on both sides, there's a certain need to shift the skills or close a certain skill gap to better work together. And in the report, we provide a couple of examples what might be possible there, including systemic thinking in the trainings that civil servants receive, for example, but also learning together. So merging these two groups in training programs so that they can directly interact with each other and learn from each other. So third, on the input side, are the funding models. And I think that plays to one thing that we've heard in the chat already on lots of useless criteria in grants from governments. So certainly there is, and we've published an entire report on this, there is an issue with funding for systemic initiatives. And to put it short, the main part here is it needs to be much more flexible and it needs to be much more long-term. And with regards to governments and what they can do, they can of course try to foster that landscape of funding options, like a menu of funding options that is available to systemic social entrepreneurs to make sure that they have what they need. But also they can look at how they provide grants to that community, because a lot of times, as we've heard, the criteria may not be especially helpful to getting grant money to the social entrepreneurs that need it most. So simply rethinking and reconsidering the way that money is being distributed would already be a big help, and keeping in mind that the recipients may not look like what the grant giver has in mind necessarily. Moving on to the enabling side, unsurprisingly, collaboration is on there. So here, what do we mean when we talk about collaboration? Is on the one side, collaboration within sectors. So a lot of times it's already very difficult for government agencies to collaborate with each other, and that makes life harder for social entrepreneurs who want to collaborate with them, because there's so many different stakeholders to reach out to, and it's sometimes not really clear who's in charge. So better collaboration within also holds for the social sector, by the way, but also better collaboration across sectors. And here, one example of what we found is that bridge builders, so people who have experience in more than one sector, say, for example, in the public sector and in the private sector, or in the public and the social sector, are extremely helpful because they have networks in both of these sectors, or maybe also in all three, and they can act as translators between the sectors, help each side understand what the other side is talking about and why they're acting and behaving in certain ways. So fostering that translation, but also making it easier to get in touch with each other. And one element there might be having a one-stop point of contact for social entrepreneurs that's placed somewhere high up in governments, so that good ideas that these social entrepreneurs produce do not get stuck somewhere at the lower levels of bureaucracy, but have a direct channel to decision makers. And finally, fostering institutionalization. So when we talk about institutionalization, we talk about making sure that innovative ideas receive a more permanent status. So institutionalization, a permanence in government action. And this could take different forms. It might mean that governments change certain policies to make a new approach the standard, the new normal. It might also be that governments take over certain initiatives and run them as government programs or in a permanent partnership with a systemic social entrepreneur. So there are different pathways. And here, what we found and what we're recommending in the report is that it's extremely helpful to have clear pathways to that institutionalization. So when government administrations are clear about what are the next steps and what are the types of institutionalization that can happen, that tends to accelerate the process and make it a lot smoother for everyone involved. And second point, it is very, very helpful to start that collaboration early on, meaning have governments involved already when ideas start, have them listen to communities that have ideas on how things could get solved, rather than developing and fully, fledging out an idea, and then once it's 100% perfect going to a government and saying, hey, we'd like to implement this. So collaboration early on is another really important factor. That said, this is sort of a very, very short overview of what we're proposing in the report. The report has tons more case examples and color and specifics on what could be done. So I very much encourage everyone to look out for it. It's currently being finalized and we're planning for a bigger launch in January, so stay tuned for that.
Thanks so much, Katharina. So this might not surprise you. I would assume, and that is because we didn't even try to find out anything new. This is just again an exercise in making the consensus that is already there in the sector explicit. Now all we need to find out is how to convince governments to actually do these things. And for that, we have just the right speakers here today. Let me start with Mariam. So tell us a little bit about your motivation for why you want to support social innovation, like on a personal level and for your government. And let us know what kinds of barriers you have encountered in your work.
So I'm grateful for the opportunity to engage with so many people on this very important issue. I have been working in the social space for quite a number of years, and I haven't been able to achieve scale or convening power until I joined government. So what I have seen is there's a lot to be said about working for government, because then you get other governments, like in my country, we have 3 layers of government. We have the federal and the state and the local government. And now that I'm working with the federal government, I'm able to achieve scale in a manner that I never would have as a private, as a social entrepreneur. I'm able to engage with the states directly. I'm able to get the civil servants to understand what I'm trying to do. And in a country of just over 200 million people, you can understand how critical it is for us to work in such large numbers and to share the ideas, to learn from one another in a much faster way. And of course, with the authority that government gives you. So I find that to be one of the greatest advantages, or 2 of them: the scale and the convening power. But I also would say that another thing that I find very interesting or very encouraging about working with social entrepreneurs is the ideas. You know, nobody has the monopoly of ideas, and sharing on a platform, you're able to garner as much and to actually shape the ideas to fit your peculiar circumstances. So you're able to avoid some pitfalls and to try and engage and also harness the effort of other people who may have made the same mistakes, who are working in the same fields, same backgrounds, have similar experiences. Getting them to support you once that platform is created. So at the moment, we're trying to actually engage the social entrepreneurs in Nigeria to get them to work directly with government. We have an issue, of course, with the dearth of funding and also the crash of oil, the fact that COVID has really disrupted so many lives. We absolutely need to work with social entrepreneurs because of the advantages that working with entrepreneurs brings to the table. And we've got a few foundations to talk to, and there's SDGs, trying to see how we can attain the SDGs, trying to categorize who does what in what space, so that we can have a direct link with them and they can attract funding. And another thing that comes with working with social entrepreneurs is, of course, the expertise in terms of transparency when it comes to financial visibility. A lot of the data they work with also supports transparency, supports distribution channels, and basically we're able to leapfrog into spaces that, you know, we would never have been able to, because there's so much learning on a platform that has social entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that perspective. Sarah, same question to you. Um, yeah, what has been working? What's your motivation, and what are the barriers that you have seen in your job?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. On my perspective is that after graduating from a business school like 10 years ago, I felt that business as usual wasn't really for me. So I decided then to do a master's degree in political science and international relations. But if I had knew that there would be social entrepreneurs, I would definitely have gone in that area of work. And so then I worked for international organizations, think tanks, and NGOs. And finally, I decided to enter in the public sector in the team of the French High Commissioner for Social Economy and Social Innovation. I think it's important when you have somebody like he was that really trusted, because he came directly from the sector. He was a social entrepreneur himself, and he decided to become that public, social entrepreneur inside the government. I think it's really important for that to have the real resources within the governments and ministries to support, but also to understand directly what social entrepreneurship is, the power they have in terms of system change. I completely agree with the idea of the report to say that we need to experience the power of collaboration and institutionalization within our own work as government. Like we said many times, we are the social entrepreneurs within our own government, our own administration and system. And this is why I'm going to tell you a story about what I've experienced. We launched 2 years ago an initiative that is called the French Impact. One of the main programs is called the Pioneers. So we help 22 social enterprises to scale up, from local initiatives to national initiatives and international if they have the opportunity. But many issues that we face is that we needed to lift some barriers, and the biggest barrier were the governments and ministries working in silos. So one of the pioneers, they are called Fédération Envie. They are already specialized in the collection, recycling, and reuse of electronic and domestic equipment, and they are now expanding their activities to the health sector by renovating medical beds or even wheelchairs, all those kind of materials. And very quickly, Envy, explained their ideas, and so we labelized them as French Impact Pioneers. And then we went to all the different ministries, because we were the ecological ministries, you had the health ministries, the finance ministry, and then we had to put everyone on the table. Even though everybody thought that was a good idea, then it took us months, really months, to get everybody on the table and push for help for them. Why? It's because the recycled material from the health sector was not reimbursed by the social security. Only the new materials would be reimbursed, which is just a crazy idea. So our work, as the French High Commission for Social Innovation, was to help them to change the laws. And I was reading on the chat, there is something that is really, really needed and quite difficult, because once you convince your own ministry, then you have other ministries, and then we had to change the law. So we had to go to the parliament. And so after that, we managed to change the laws. And now, some of the materials that are now recycled are getting reimbursed by our social security programs. But it took months, it took many resources, and now we're saving money. So this is really good for the government, also for the health sector, and of course for the social entrepreneurs. So this is one of the examples, and I have many of that we had to take some time, and we had to break out in our own administration. Even though, in France, we have a law for social economy, but we still need to explain what is social economy to other ministries and even parliamentarians. For that, we also decided to launch another program that is called the public hackers, to act our own administration. So we're training public servants to what is social innovation, and so that they are aware when a social entrepreneur comes, and they don't say no at the first, because many of the experience that we had feedback from social entrepreneurs is that they were saying they don't even know what we are talking about. So this is really a big step. I hope that the report will help on that. And for that, we could ask, because the idea of the session is also how to get to achieve the SDGs. And I think for many and almost all SDGs, we will have example of that. So for me, it's really important to have your own social entrepreneurs within the public sector, and really to build that trust. I know that this is something that is really important for me. It was really to co-build those public policies and try to make the social entrepreneurs world more understandable, And I think that sometimes it's really good to have, your own allies in the governments that already know what you're talking about when you have a different, for example, financing ecosystem, because that's really, really different. So many issues that we've been working on, and I think it's really good to have more and more examples of things that work, so we can already say, hey, we have an example that works. You can just copy paste, and that will be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And I cannot agree more to your point about having these social entrepreneurs within government. I mean, the fact that you and Mariam helped us with the report only made this possible, for example. And I can only encourage people in your position in the audience to reach out to us and tell us what you need to convince your government colleagues to work in this direction, because we don't really know what these internal champions within governments needs in terms of arguments or networks or whatever it might be. And so we need your support so that we can do our ecosystem initiatives in a way that actually helps you. That brings us to the social entrepreneur perspective. Blair, I know that you have been working with governments on a number of initiatives, but can you maybe give us just one example of a social innovation that you helped to institutionalize, and all the barriers that you had to overcome? And then based on the recommendations that Katerina shared in the beginning, like how would your job have been easier had the government already implemented all the recommendations that we provide in the report?
Thank you, Odin, and nice to be here, and congratulations to you and Katharina and Florian and all the authors of what is an excellent report with tons of really, really good advice and guidance for social entrepreneurs and for governments that want to scale up in this way. I run an organization called the Accountability Lab. We work to find creative approaches to governance, so really systemic changes. And we recently have been running a campaign called the Coronavirus Civic Action campaign, which is a campaign to debunk rumors and counter misinformation during COVID-19, which, as we all know, is a huge problem. We've been doing this in 10 countries in lots and lots of local languages. And the point is to create a shared basis of understanding around the pandemic, and then work with communities and policymakers and people in power in government to solve problems and build trust over time. So it's a concrete way, I think, to shift what's happening in response to this crisis. And actually the 5 points that come out in the reports that Katerina mentioned are all extremely relevant, because I think if governments in some of the places where we work had made some of these changes, it would have made this process an awful lot easier and helped us contribute even more to the goals of countering misinformation. So very briefly, to touch on each of them and give you an example. The first point is about open information. Of course, this is about creating this shared basis of understanding, and you cannot do that without open information, open data, and a very clear sense from governments about how to navigate this crisis. And in all sorts of countries all over the world, governments are often unable to provide that information to citizens. Simple things like how to navigate lockdowns, but also more complicated data like data on spending in terms of the response and where that money is going and who's getting contracts, all of that sort of thing. The report mentions that there are standards for this that governments should sign up to, which they absolutely should. But there are also international initiatives which can help governments make commitments around these issues. I'm also on the steering committee of an organization called the Open Government Partnership, of which Kaduna State in Nigeria is a member, and that initiative that Katerina mentioned, where citizens are also providing feedback on projects, is part of that commitment. So there's a lot governments can do to open this up and help initiatives like ours provide information to them. The second on building capacity of civil servants and connecting them to social entrepreneurs, I couldn't agree with more. We've been working through another project to revise the civil service training curriculum in Pakistan. And not just in Pakistan, but in many places, those curricula are very old, quite old-fashioned, very one-directional. It's lecturing to civil servants about what they should do. It's not interesting, it's not engaging, and it's not creating a learning journey that's really integrating the skills that you've mentioned that we need, like systems thinking, collaborative mindsets, human-centered design, those kinds of things. And if civil servants I think, are engaged in that kind of thinking, again, it would help dramatically to improve the kind of initiatives that we're trying to put forward in terms of countering misinformation and creating collective buy-in for responses to something like COVID-19. Very quickly, thirdly, on funding models, I couldn't agree more, particularly for initiatives like ours, which are a bit less tangible. This isn't providing a frontline response to the health crisis. It's not immunizing people. It's not providing PPEs. It's countering misinformation, which is a longer term systemic shift. It's more difficult to measure. These are the kinds of things that donors and funders generally are less able to support or sometimes need a little bit more convincing about. So this is very welcome. The systems change that needs to happen is long-term. It's not always linear. It can't be mapped to a one-year grant matrix. So this idea that the governments could step in and provide that kind of longer-term support is very, very welcome indeed. On collaboration, the point I would make there is, of course, there needs to be collaboration within sectors, but as we have just been talking about in the chat, also between levels of government in larger countries, but even in smaller countries, that connection and building those systems between what the federal government is doing and what local governments are doing to support social entrepreneurship is critical, because in the end, much of the change that we need to see happens at the local level. And so we need local buy-in from government officials. We need them to have the power and the authority and the mandate to support entrepreneurs and let things grow from there, because that's how system change happens ultimately. And then finally, on fostering institutionalization, the one point I would make and put out for discussion is, of course, that all of this is political. It's not technical. So, of course, we want governments to adopt some of these approaches, but the challenges to that are often political, and some of these approaches need to be somewhat independent, like ours, because governments, if they're not trusted, will not generate the buy-in that's needed to create data to counter misinformation, for example. So that's a larger building trust process with governments, which has to be ongoing, and is a political process. I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Blair. This is the beauty of having social entrepreneurs in these discussions. They make the whole thing so much more tangible. So you have now heard in one example how each of the 5 pillars that we outlined in the report can have a tangible impact on institutionalizing a social innovation. And this is by far not the only example, of course. Let us turn to the questions from the chat. And we already got a good one, which is, how does this approach, or how do our recommendations that we feature in our report change, like between countries or between continents or between the socioeconomic status of countries, however you want to divide it? And I would like to pass that question on to both Sarah and Mariam. Maybe you, like, as you read the report, did anything strike you as, like, would you have to adapt anything to your specific country, or do you think it all applies equally well everywhere?
Maybe I'll start, and I'll let Mariam complete what I'll say. Of course, that what I was putting in the chat, it's completely different, and Andrea has a good question on that. For example, in France, we already have a law on social economy. The social entrepreneurs still need to be recognized, but we have at least an ecosystem that is quite mature. We have, some discussions between the social economy, more traditional actors, versus some of the social entrepreneurs that feel that they are different. So you have those kind of things, but it's really a mature ecosystem. You can go to a government in France that you would go in another country where even the word social economy, people don't even know what it's about. I remember that we had some issues during, I know it's more for developed countries, but during the G7 and the G20, the G7 negotiations, and some people were saying, oh, we can't add social economy in the final text because it's called social, and we don't want to support social things. But social entrepreneurs are not only working for social issues, they are working on many issues. And I thought that even for G7 countries, you have those kind of different levels. We don't have the same definitions. That was something that I was working on with the High Commissioner at some point to have a resolution adopted at the UN. You can be for or against the UN, but at least to have social economy or social entrepreneurship recognized as a concept would be helpful in some governments, because they will force them to recognize that social entrepreneurs are there, they are different, they have a different types of ecosystem of funding. So you need specific laws. So for example, you can go to one country, for France and for another country that don't have this ecosystem and ask for the same thing. For example, in France, we have some specific, tax issues with social entrepreneurs. If you don't even have that ecosystem, and of course you can ask the same questions. So of course the report is really useful for that. Some countries, are more mature, so it would be different. But of course, it's always, share best practices is always good. So maybe, some adaptation. And I think it would be really interesting to have different conversation with the different type of countries. But, even within Europe, you have so many differences. And I would just say something that was also in the chat. And also when you change government. And I'm the perfect examples. I've been working with the High Commissioner for the past 3 years, and now we have a change of government, so you have a whole new team. So our French social entrepreneurs now, they have to go back to the government and re-explain the same thing that they were explaining to us 3 years ago. So that's why for me it's really important, to lobby, to have a team that stays within the administration at the local level. Really, local territories are very important to keep this continuity of policies. So really different types. But I think where you have most of the problem is because social entrepreneurs are now recognized as helpful not only for social issues. So that would be my first fight for social entrepreneurs, is really to get recognition. I think that's the main important thing for other governments to take into consideration.
Mariam, what about you? You're still muted.
Yes. Yeah, there are bound to be differences even within Africa, because we have countries that are federations, and in our context, Nigeria has 36 states and all of them are autonomous to a large extent. So, the federal buy-in doesn't mean the state buy-in. Each state has control over its own legislature, it has its own budget. And so the issues that we would like to see, targeted it depends on the funds that are available and made available by the state government. So, the platform that gives the collaboration that leverages on what is available is clearly required for sustainability. And I find that in Nigeria in particular, because we are developing countries, there are many examples of how, government projects begin, but unless we have outsiders in terms of the social entrepreneurs or the development partners actually engaging with it, it can get disrupted. But when we do have social entrepreneurs involved, the tendency is politicians will step back to allow, for sustainability, because there are structures in place, there are mechanisms in place. My experience is that sometimes you find that politicians think about themselves. A lot of these issues that we're targeting are not tangible in the sense of, you can measure like infrastructure. So where you get a budget for education, for example, the tendency is politicians would rather focus on the structure because that is what they can say is their legacy. But when you talk about the quality of teaching, that is not tangible. And if we can bring a lot of energy, a lot of expertise on that platform to ensure that the quality, which is just as critical, if not more critical, then we're bound to drop the ball, and the disparities will continue to rise or to grow wider. And as we know, you can have a good structure in a community that is poor. Unless you address the poverty that is in that community, the children won't take advantage of the infrastructure. So I'm saying the infrastructure has to go along with those issues that are intangible, and a lot of those intangible things are being, you know, addressed by social entrepreneurs. And the advantage you have is that there's a lot of experience out there that can be brought together to support what you're trying to do. And the more people there are working in this field, for me, it's more advantageous because of the fact that we can build capacity at state level, we can build capacity at local government level, harnessing everything that is available and trying to see that we keep our eye on the ball.
Thanks so much. So leave the structures to the politicians so that they have something to talk about in their speeches and do the actual work in the social sector. Yeah, sounds like a good division of labor to me. But as you saw, right, so the general principles apply to many countries, but then how it looks like in practice really has to be adapted to where the country is, and how the structures are, and what kind of polity we are dealing with in the first place, right? Not even every country. We are not always talking about democracies even. So there are huge differences, of course, when it comes to implementation. Blair, there's a question that you can maybe talk to. And that's about this power differential between like a social entrepreneur or a small group of entrepreneurs and then like the government on the other side. So how do you manage that?
Thanks, Odin. And it's a great question, and there's no easy answer to that, and it depends on the context, of course. But I think, you know, coming back to my point about all of this being political, one key way is to persuade policymakers and those in power in government that this is about delivery. This is about helping them achieve goals that they want to achieve themselves for their own political ends, but that will also support citizens and make life better for the kind of people that social entrepreneurs are trying to support. I'll give you an example. We do a lot of work in Pakistan, as I mentioned, and there's an emergency response unit in Punjab province called Rescue 1122, which was started by a social entrepreneur who went into government, institutionalized this within the provincial government, and persuaded the political leaders that an effective emergency response team was necessary, got the buy-in, it proved that it worked, demonstrated that it could be effective. And after that, even though there were changes in government, it's been very difficult and not even considered by future leaders to get rid of that program, because it's too effective. It delivers something that citizens want and therefore supports their political agenda. So that, of course, will vary across context, but is one way to try and do things, to really think about how we can frame this and how we can deliver in ways that provide support to politicians and to what people need. But the second very quick point I would make is again, coming back to some of these slightly larger supranational or international initiatives that all of us as social entrepreneurs can support in our own ways. So the climate is an obvious one, pushing for governments to sign up to very long-term goals on these issues, so that despite changes in government, those goals are still something that people within administrations are aiming for. In our world of accountability, I mentioned the Open Government Partnership. This is another big initiative where governments and civil society co-create commitments to achieve some of these kinds of goals. So that can also protect some efforts from political changes as well.
Thanks. And I think this is also, that speaks to the perspective that we try to take for this particular report. We were not so much exploring the question, how can social entrepreneurs better collaborate with governments? We were asking, how can governments better utilize the field of social entrepreneurship to achieve their goals? And maybe, Katharina, can you, we heard already some examples, but can you can you zoom out a little bit and talk to us about some of the numbers, some of the models that would make it attractive for governments to make better use of this particular sector?
Sure, thank you, Odin. So maybe two thoughts before I get into numbers. The first one being, we did have a lot of conversations with government interview partners on how to frame this in a way that it's also easy for governments to hear. And it turns out if we frame it as we want something from governments, that tends to not work very well, because there's a lot of people who want something from a government. But framing it in a way of social entrepreneurs can help governments achieve goals that they've already decided on, opens an entirely different door. So that would be my first point on encouragement, to frame it in a way of you can be an ally to governments. The second point, before getting into actual numbers, is I like to compare social innovation to technology innovation, because essentially both develop new approaches, new ideas to solve problems. The difference is technology innovation is rather easy to fund, because there's a lot of money to be made there. Because there are markets and products can be sold, services can be sold. Social innovation often creates something like a public good. Everyone benefits when our schools are getting better, when our healthcare systems are getting better, and when our environment is less polluted. But there's no market on which we can monetize that. So it's something that society benefits from that no one is willing to pay for. And that is the big issue there, that makes it so difficult to argue how big the potential is. Now, we've tried that both in this upcoming report and in a report that we've published 2 years ago, to look at what might be the potential of the innovations systemic social entrepreneurs have developed if they were scaled, for example, throughout one country. And in that case, 2 years ago, we've looked at the example of Germany and analyze a couple of different innovations and try to really take apart what are the implications for welfare systems, healthcare systems, school systems, if we were to fix different issues. And these examples reach from better ways to detect breast cancer early on by training blind women to detect these lumps in breasts, also giving them a livelihood, to early recognition of students that skip school and are then at risk of not finishing school, and then at risk of having a much worse economic trajectory in their future lives. So these different examples, we've taken all of them, taken apart what are the implications for societies, what are societies paying for, and what would they stand to gain if we had a different outcome. And we've arrived at a highly estimated potential, but a potential of 18 billion euros per year in Germany alone. And that's a massive number, and that's only based on an assumption that scales the impact we've calculated to all Ashoka Fellows in Germany. And I think at that point we had 72 Ashoka Fellows in Germany. Now there are more, and there are certainly a lot more systemic social entrepreneurs in Germany. So you can imagine that that potential is huge. At the same time, looking at the very, very macro level, the McKinsey Global Institute has looked at the potential of improving healthcare worldwide. And they've looked at existing interventions, so things that are already there that would need to be deployed, and what's the outcome of deploying that for societies. The report is called Prioritizing Health. It's a great read, just in case you're interested in that. But what they found is that by just deploying existing interventions, we could add up to 10 years of healthy life in the middle of people's lives. So like instead of 65, that would be the new 55. And in terms of how effective are these interventions, they found that for every dollar invested, the economic return in terms of added GDP, because people are able to work longer, are not sick as much, things like that, is between $2 and $4. So what you're invested, $2 to $4 in return, which is quite amazing. So there are a lot of different publications that look at the large scale potential of fixing social issues. And I think we need to more closely tie what social entrepreneurs are working on and are fixing to these potential calculations, because that's a good link to make where we already know what good would look like, and then establishing the evidence of social entrepreneurs are really contributing to that, and there's a proven solution, would help make that link. Hope that was what you were looking for, Odin.
Thanks so much, Katharina. That's the beauty of collaborating with McKinsey. Like we in the social sector might have a hunch, but then there are people who can actually support it with numbers. That's always helpful. Now that leaves us with only a big thank you to all of our speakers, to you in the audience. I think I've never seen as many chat messages in a session like in this one. Thanks so much for interacting and for coming up with these questions. And I have a few calls to action. 4 of them in total. First, invite your government contacts to work with social entrepreneurs. We might not all be on a first name basis with our prime ministers, but we all, like via one corner or another, might know somebody in government. And the more people have heard about social entrepreneurship and innovation, the better. If you happen to work at governments, reach out to us. We want to learn what you need to convince your peers and move forward with the recommendations that we will publish in the report. Third, Catalyst 2030 is a global network of social entrepreneurs from all major networks, Ashoka, Acorn Green, Skoll, and Schwab, and was a key partner for this report. We will use this network is going to use the report at the UN and the OECD to establish social entrepreneurship in these institutions. Reach out to Catalyst 2030 if you are interested in working on ecosystem initiatives like that one. There are a lot of others in the pipeline as well. And finally, of course, read the report. It is not published yet. It will be launched in January. If you want to be informed about it, register at the Catalyst 2030 newsletter. The link is going to be in the chat. That's it. Let me finish a few minutes before the official end time, so you have a bio break before the next session starts. Enjoy your evening, and let's start changing governments. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Odin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A great event. Thank you.